Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPaWrites here again, and today we get the last developer notes before the First Descendant has its crossplay beta next week, and I wanted to go over the new information that we received because it is very fascinating to me, the improvements that they made leading up to this next beta. I know, like I mentioned in previous videos, the last beta was hit or miss for some people, but I'm really excited to get hands-on with this game once again. I think it has an immense amount of potential, and everything I've seen from the developers so far has showed they really want this game to improve by leaps and bounds from every time we see it. So jumping in, it says improvements to mission progression structure. There used to be a linear path where essentially you would do one mission, it would complete, then you'd move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. It was pretty standard MMO type missions, but now in this crossplay open beta test, you will have a new mission progression structure. The biggest difference is that the fields will be played on a battlefield by battlefield basis. A typical battlefield consists of one camp and 3 to 4 missions. Clearing all the missions in the battlefield opens up the next battlefield where you'll be able to play new missions. Essentially, they want it so that way when you're jumping into these missions, a lot of other players will also be on the same mission, so that way it feels more like a shared world experience, more MMO-like rather than previously, where you felt pretty much solo jumping from one mission to the next. So there's no particular order in which you must complete the missions in the battlefields. Pick and choose anyone you like. And so this is going to, again, provide a little bit more customization in the way you handle the game and approach the missions. So I like that. So yeah, it's a very good change in my personal opinion. So we've improved our field placement rules to ensure that players of similar progression are matched up often as possible when they enter a field. So that means you should be matching with fellow players who are on the same mission. Hypothetically, obviously that's not going to work all the time. Depends on the player count number and everything like that, but that's, I think, a good thing. We've also made many improvements to the missions themselves. Newly revamped missions are centered around the bases for each field. Extermination missions are carried out at the Vulgus camp, and defense missions take place at strategic points. We've added new objectives and progression methods so that each mission feels like a different playing experience. So they talk about how extermination, the objective is to attack the camp and eliminate all the enemies. Then you've got search. This mission focuses on searching for the Ironheart. The detector is powered by your character's shield energy. Since the detector depletes your character's shield, the mission will be easier if you use Ajax, who is a defense specialist. That is very interesting to me because it'll behoove every team to have an Ajax on the team, but it does provide some interesting playstyles. It looks like you're escorting a payload, essentially, which is not really going to play into the strengths of characters like Bunny and the more movement-focused characters. So I'll be really interested to see how each mission feels on a character-by-character basis. Then we've got Seizure. You must disarm the security system of a Vulgus repository and seize the resources. This one seems pretty standard again, almost like capturing a point, essentially. And enemies will swarm and defend the repository. You gotta have to stop them from getting too close. So essentially, you don't want them to get near the capture point. And then finally, we've got Transport Disruption. Actually, we got a couple more. You must stop the Vulgus from transporting resources and collect a certain amount of resource shards. Obtaining the resource shards requires capturing nearby areas. Sharon can use stealth to secure these areas without fighting. That's fascinating. So it seems like each of the characters is going to have certain missions that they excel at, and then other missions you're going to have to do separately. But yeah, they show off a little bit of the enemies essentially just walking right by her as she's invisible and cloaked. So I think that could be a really interesting way to approach some of these missions. Most people are just going to try to gun it down. And then you've got Collection. You must retrieve the data fragments before vital information about Albion is compromised. This platforming mission requires you to use jumps and grapple swings to maneuver between precarious structures without falling. So if you're a fan of parkour, if you're a fan of the movement in the game, this one will be fun for you. But it's one of those things that depending on the character and the type of playstyle you have, it will be fascinating to see how everyone approaches all of these different missions. In addition to these types, we also have new base-centered missions in store, such as destruction, supply, capture, and defense. Of course, dungeons consist of linear missions with a mix of diverse objectives. Each dungeon also features a unique boss. The bosses of the dungeons have been improved as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So they have new monster appearance animations. So instead of just appearing out of thin air, looks like the monsters are either going to come from hallways, or if you're outside in the open world, They're going to have transport ships that they're going to drop in from. This is similar to something like Destiny, where you see enemies coming from certain locations instead of just appearing out of nowhere, which I think is a good touch. It shows that the enemies aren't just magically appearing and disappearing at every spot. So, and they show off a little bit about how they come through doorways and the like as well in dungeons. So, again, these are all little changes, but I think a lot of times the little changes add up to being a big deal. If you have all these little touches that are effective and they provide a advancement in the way the game is played and it feels a little bit more structured, then I think the game as a whole just feels better, and I like that options, because you can ignore a lot of these little things, but if you do, then again, it's going to add up to the little things feeling like a lot of things are missing. So, talking about dungeons, each dungeon features a unique boss, a named monster. They have more diverse skills and patterns than normal monsters. They want to improve battles, so they have a new phase. Essentially, they have an immunity phase. You're going to have to figure out how to damage the boss after the invincible phase, and that's going to require you to do different mechanics. I think that's not a bad idea. I know a lot of people don't like invincibility phases, but depending on how the mechanics work, that could be interesting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how each of these dungeon bosses is approached for sure. Battle with Demogorgon. Important battles like dungeon bosses also need environmental settings that increase the tension. For this purpose, we set areas where boss battles take place as no resurrection zones. Essentially, you won't be able to revive. You'll restart at the beginning of the battle of the no resurrection zone. In addition, areas where dungeon boss battles take place become closed off and prevent you from exiting once the battle begins, creating an environment where you must be more focused during the battle. You can't just flee no matter what you're doing. They've also added some things across the world map, like a supply box, military supply, gas tank, and bombshell. And these essentially are items on the open world where you'll be able to blow them up or destroy them. They're destructible. So I think that's another nice little change that, again, it's not end all be all. It's not going to change someone's opinion of the game by itself, but it is a nice little addition that's going to improve the game overall. And then they talk about how the Sterile Land is a new zone added precisely for this kind of opening test. It consists of solid structures and canyons that make for more interesting and enjoyable platforming. They have like elevators and the like, and mid-air grapple points, which is all good. And yeah, overall, I think, like I've kind of reiterated a couple times, these changes are going to just add more life to the game. And that's really what it comes down to. All of these little improvements. We've gone over some of the bigger improvements that we've gotten from the game. And now we're getting some little things that are going to improve the game slowly but surely, a little bit at a time. And I like that. I think as long as they continue to add these quality of life changes into the game, especially leading up into release, the game is in good shape and we have a lot of room to grow with a ton of potential here. So I'm looking forward to getting hands-on. I'll have lots of gameplay next week once the crossplay beta does drop. Anyway, my name is JoPa. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more First Descendant content from me going forward. I hope you have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.